give the floor over to Edward P. Jones. Thank you.
Peter, the Holy Cross graduates all around the world wouldn't forgive me if I didn't say I didn't go to the University of Massachusetts, but to Holy Cross College in Worcester. The section I'm going to be reading is about 5 or so important people, starting with Fern and Ramsey Elston, who are a black couple who own about 13 slaves. There's also Sheriff John Skivington, whom Peter has mentioned. There is Jebediah Dickinson, who is a runaway slave and who, like Fern's husband Ramsey, is a gambler. And finally, there is Reverend Wilbur Mann, M-A-N-N, who once upon a time owned the runaway Jebediah Dickinson. From time to time, I'll be mentioning slave patrollers. These were primarily poor white men who were hired to find and bring back runaway slaves. The slave driving Fern Elston home that day saw the man first, and the slave told Fern there was someone up ahead in the road. It was nearing sundown, the sky afire with the red and the orange. Slave patrollers had already passed them, so Fern was assured that whoever it was someone who had a legitimate reason to be in the road. "I can't make it out," Zeus the slave said to her. "It's just a big something out there." It was big because the man was sitting on a horse, but with the dying sun behind the man making him a large silhouette, what Zeus could make out was a figure of one piece, not quite man and not quite horse. "You be Miss Elston," the man said, taking off his hat when they were near. He was a Negro, and Fern could see with the last of the day's light that he was the color of a dark pecan. "I be Jebediah Dickinson," the man said. "Are you looking for me, Mr. Dickinson?" Fern said. "I am, ma'am, and yet I ain't. I am tired, Mr. Dickinson. Riddles are not what I want this time of the day. Your husband be owing me $500, and all I want is for him to pay so I can get where I need to be going." Ramsey Elston, her husband, had left home the day before, the need to gamble having finally claimed him after so many weeks. "I assume you have been up to the house, and that my husband is not there. Beyond that, I cannot help you," Fern said. "Pass on," she said to Zeus' servant, and Zeus raised the reins, but when the man began to speak, Zeus dropped them again. "A man would think that the debt of one be the debt of the other when two people are one and the same as man and wife," Jebediah Dickinson said. He had not moved. He was more or less catty-cornered to the road, though not in any threatening way, and Zeus could have gone through if his mistress had ordered it so. Jebediah's horse seemed the nervous sort, head forever up and down and tail wagging for all it was worth. "A man would think that the debt of one be the debt of the other when two people are one and the same as man and wife," Jebediah said again. "Is that so?" Fern said. Jebediah got down off the horse and came around to her, and the horse's tail stopped wagging, and a few moments later, her head stopped bobbing. "You're quite mistaken, Mr. Dickinson. Whatever my husband does out in the world is his business. It has nothing to do with me, no more than what you do in the world is my business." "All I'm saying, ma'am, I do not care about all that you are saying. His debts are his own. If you are a gambler, and I assume that you are, you would know that. Pass on," Fern said to Zeus the servant. Jebediah was still there the next day and all the days after that for nearly a week. Fern came and went, and he said nothing to her, just raised his hat at her going and raised it again at her coming back. In the night, he was still out there, for she could make out a small fire, and there was movement, though that could just as easily have been a bear. The slave patrollers often came up to him, and Jebediah pulled out his free papers from inside his shirt, and they would move on. Fern could see him from her window far up the path. What he ate, Fern did not know, and her slaves could not tell her. 7 days after he was there, he knocked at her door. Zeus opened it and told Jebediah his mistress didn't like slaves and Negro strangers like him knocking at her front door. "That's what they made the back door for," Zeus said. "Then what they make the front door for?" Jebediah asked. Zeus closed the door gently, as if he didn't really want to make a fuss, In less than 2 minutes, Fern came to the door, and Zeus, unsmiling, was behind her. Miss Elson, my horse be dying on me, and I don't own a gun, so I can't put her out of misery, Jebediah said. His hat was in front of his chest, and he was holding it with both hands. If I was strong enough, I could wring her neck, but that would take time, and she would suffer, and so would I. I have a knife, but that's about the same amount of suffering for us both. Zeus, Fern said, please ask Coley to come here. Tell Coley to bring the rifle and the pistol. Yes'm, Zeus said. Are you planning to make that place out there your home, Mr. Dickinson? Fern asked as they waited. Your husband been owing me $500. That's all there is to it. She would have sighed, but that was not in her nature. Sighing was an indication of surrender, of approaching helplessness. She folded her arms. Zeus came around the side of the house carrying a pistol, and he was followed by Coley, a man even larger than Jebediah. Coley had a rifle resting on his shoulder. The three men went out to the horse, and after Jebediah said something to Coley, the man handed him the rifle, and Jebediah shot the horse twice in the head and then handed the rifle back to Coley. Fern watched from the veranda, and she could see how the horse simply disappeared in 1-2 seconds from her treeless view, leaving not one sign that it had ever been there except for a little bothersome dust. Zeus had just stood with his hands behind his back, the pistol in his left hand. They came back, and Jebediah asked Fern for the loan of a shovel to bury the beast. And when he was done with the hole, Coley came out with another man and 2 mules, and the 3 men and the 2 mules managed to drag the dead horse over and down into the hole. Dickinson covered the hole up. Zeus did not participate because all the work he ever did was in the house, except for a little puttering in Fern's garden. Whenever Fern came out and back after that, she found Jebediah sitting on his saddle when he wasn't standing. He raised his hat as usual, and in all those days her husband never showed up or sent word about his whereabouts. Odin Peoples, the Cherokee slave patroller, got tired of seeing Jebediah out there day in, day out, and he said so to Sheriff John Skivington. That was the second week Jebediah was there. Give him a little more time, Skivington said. I'll be patient with vagrancy, but not till the end of my days. And so near the end of the second week, in broad open daylight, when he wasn't supposed to be on patrol, Odin rode up to Jebediah and pointed his gun at him. Fern watched him from her window. Jebediah raised his hands without any trouble. He must have said something about his being a free man because Odin shouted something long and hard at him. Odin was on his horse, and he got down, never once taking the gun off Jebediah. He roped Jebediah's hands and waist, a rope of a good 6 feet, and then he got back up on his horse and he started riding, one hand holding the reins and the other holding the end of the rope that was chaining the walking Jebediah. Odin had holstered his gun because he felt he didn't need it anymore. Fern came out to the road with Zeus behind her, and they watched together. They watched him for a long time. It was more than 10 miles into town, but the woman and her slave couldn't see that far, only about a mile or more, and then the trees and the hills got in the way. Fern told Zeus to get someone to bring in Mr. Dickinson's saddle. As far as anyone could remember, there had never been a colored man in the Manchester County jail. None of them, free or slave, had ever done anything to warrant a stay. The free men in Manchester knew the tenuousness of their lives and always endeavored to be upstanding. They knew they were slaves with just another title. Most crimes and misdemeanors by slaves were dealt with by their masters. They could even hang a slave if he killed another slave, but that would have been like throwing money down a well after the slave had already thrown the first load of money down, as one master said to another. Sheriff Skivington was most reluctant to put a Negro in a facility that would one day have to be used again by a white man, a white criminal. He resented Odin for putting him in that predicament. He could have chained Jebediah in Sawyer's barn out back, but Sawyer wanted an arm and a leg for everything, and Skivington felt the law shouldn't have to pay that much. So he put Jebediah in a jail cell and decided that everyone would have to live with it. Jebediah's free papers said he had been manumitted by Reverend Wilbur Mann of Danville, Virginia. The papers looked right, but Skivington telegraphed the sheriff down Danville Way that he had a suspect Negro, and the sheriff telegraphed back that Jebediah was the property of Reverend Wilbur Mann. Reverend Cumming, the telegram added. In 4 days, Mann was at the jail. He arrived early one morning before Skivington had even reached the jail, and the sheriff found Mann looking in the window, laughing. The Reverend was a tall man, very gaunt, and he had the prettiest long blonde hair Skeffington had ever seen on a man. "It belongs to me," man kept saying once they were inside. He produced a bill of sale that showed Jebediah was bought in Durham, North Carolina, 16 years before for $250. "How you get that free paper?" Skeffington said. Man looked abashed. "He wrote 'em. He can read and write better than you and me." Man took off his nice gray hat and set it with both hands on Skeffington's desk near the Bible. "That was my wife's doing, bless her name. I told her not to do something like that, but I could never say no to her. He was just a pup back then. She was sweet, except for doing things I didn't approve of." Jebediah in the cell was silent. "You should make your wife stop doing work like that," Skeffington said. "She should know she shouldn't be doing that. She know what the law is about teaching slaves to read and write." "I know," man said. "But she dead now. Been dead for 2 years. Left us not long before this damn Jebediah here took off. Bless her name. I got me a real smart wife now. She can't read nor write, so she can't teach anybody what she don't know." He told Skeffington that Dickinson was his first wife's maiden name. "Ain't that a kick in the head for you?" the preacher said. "I don't know," Skeffington said. "I'll just accept your word that it is." "But it is. It's a big kick in the head," man said. "If you didn't free him," Skeffington said, "how you get that free paper?" "I told you, he can read. He can read and write. He can do it better than I can, can't you, Jebediah? Can cipher like the Dickens too." Man walked over to the bars. "Damn your soul to hell for causing me all this trouble." Jebediah still said nothing. "And why you want to go and despoil my wife's good memory by using her name to commit a crime with, huh? You tell me that. Damn your soul." "You can take him home any time," Skeffington said. "Let me go out and get a little mouthful of something to eat. I brought my neighbor. He eating now. We both can get him back where he belonged." Man had turned to talk to Skeffington, but now he went back to Jebediah. "I'm going to whip your black hide till God tells me to stop, you hear me?" Jebediah stepped back and sat on the pallet on the floor. The cot for the white prisoners had been removed. "Yes, sirree. You rest up now, 'cause I'm going to tan you good, boy. And then I'm going to let you heal and give you time to grow another hide. And then I'm going to whip that one off you. Then let you grow another. Then whip that one off. Go around despoiling my wife's good name and committing God knows what crimes. That's all the work you're ever going to have to do again, Jebediah. Just grow hides and watch me whip 'em off you." Man took up his hat, and then he leaned his head back a few degrees, patted down the front part of the blonde hair, and set the hat on his head with the same gentleness he would use to set the hat down in a hat box. "I'll be back directly," he told Skeffington, and went out the door. As it happened, Ramsey Elson had returned home 2 nights before. He told Fern, his wife, that he didn't know any Jebediah Dickinson, and if a Jebediah Dickinson didn't exist for him, then surely a $500 debt couldn't exist. Fern knew he was not telling her the truth. She had intended to go into town to inquire about Jebediah the day after her husband told her he did not know him, but Ramsey rose that first morning and was as sweet as ever. That evening he turned sour, and she went to bed determined to go in and inquire about Jebediah. She did not know about Man, and she arrived with Coley at the jail just about the time Man must have been forking in his first mouthful of food at the table with his neighbor. Skeffington told her the what all about Jebediah, and she sat under Surrey, waiting for Man to finish his meal. When he came back up the street, he was followed by a white man just as tall as he was, but the man stayed outside the jail after Man went in. Man took off his hat again with both hands and placed it back on Skeffington's desk beside the Bible. Fern came in. She told him she wanted to buy Jebediah. Right away, Man asked, "How much?" When she told him $250, he did a little click with the side of his mouth to indicate he was displeased with the figure. "You cannot say he is very reliable, given his history," Fern said. "Paid $350 for him when he was a pup," Man said. Skeffington had seen the bill of sale for $250, but he didn't contradict Man. Fern said $300. Man walked to the cell where Jebediah was still sitting on the pallet. A sale was certainly going to be made that day, and it was plain on Man's face. What was also plain was the disappointment that he would not be able to do all he'd been planning since he came up from Danville. Perhaps it was just as well, he thought, both hands on the bars of the cell, because just how many beatings could he manage before Jebediah keeled over and died on him? Fern and Man said nothing for a few minutes, And finally Fern said, $375, a good profit for any man on any day. Man agreed. Man and the white man he came with escorted Fern and her driver Coley and Jebediah back to her place. Jebediah was roped again, and he sat in the front seat beside Coley, who never said a word to him. At Fern's place, Man and the white man took Jebediah into the barn, and there they chained him to a wall. If he happens to get up and disappear during the night, Man said, before he and his companion left, I am due my money. I understand that, Fern said, but I anticipate no disappearances. All this time, Man thought he was dealing with a white woman, and he was never to know any different. She told Coley to make sure Jebediah was comfortable, and he was as comfortable as he could be with less freedom to move about than he had in Skiffinger's jail cell. Her husband, who had not been about when she came back with Jebediah, was brought out to the barn the next day, and right off Jebediah started ranting and raving. Where's my goddamn money, Ramsey? You owe me $500, and I want every goddamn penny. He strained against the chains and kicked straw up at Ramsey. Let me loose, you hear? He shouted to Fern. I don't know you, and I know nothing about some $500, Ramsey said, his feet apart and ignoring the straw that was settling on his boots. Why you buy something that will give you nothing but trouble, Ramsey said to Fern. Standing there with all the love in you now, huh? Jebediah said to Ramsey. Coley had gone to Jebediah, and whenever he would strain against the chains trying to reach Ramsey, Coley would take hold of the chains and pull him back. There's a lot of people in Richmond and places that would mighty surprise you had a damn wife. Then to Fern, Jebediah said, I didn't know he had a wife till he woke up screaming with that lovely across the hall from me one night. Woke me up and woke a whole lot of other people up too. Some straw had settled on Fern's dress and boots, and she now began picking it all off. I want my damn $500, Ramsey, and I want every penny now. Ramsey left the barn. Fern left off picking off straw and stepped closer to Jebediah. You will stay here until you learn some manners, until you learn you cannot get up and walk about like some free man. I am free, Jebediah said. Man ain't know what he's talking about. I am free. The law does not say that. She had intended, only hours before, to free him, allow what she had paid for him to be a trade for what Ramsey owed him. She had expected Jebediah to go for that, because he would be, after all, free and clear once and for all. But the knowledge of her husband's infidelity had come full and heavy and squatted down big in front of her, blocking everything else out. She resented her husband, and now she resented the messenger. This barn, she said, has been here many years, and it will stand many more with you in it if you cannot learn manners. Manners ain't what I need, lady. I need my money. Fern said to Coley, I don't want him going anywhere until he learns right from wrong, night from day. Yes'm, Coley said, and pulled 3 times on the chain. You and your goddamn no-good husband can go to hell, Jebediah shouted as she went out. You hear me good? Both of y'all can go straight to hell. Jebediah stayed there 4 days, and then he told Coley that he was ready to do what Fern had paid for him to do, and Coley and another man took Jebediah to the back of the house, and Fern came out and down to him. I want no trouble. I want not one moment's trouble, Fern said. All right, Jebediah said, and she slapped him. I thought you said he'd learned some manners, Fern said to Coley. He told me he had, mistress. He told me that. Coley grabbed Jebediah by the neck and forced him to his knees. After some time, Jebediah said, please tell him to let me up. Tell him to let me up. I'm going to do right. I told you all that. Jebediah was a good worker when he was there to work. For more than 2 weeks, Fern had no trouble from him. And Coley, who was as close to an overseer as the Elsons had, kept watch on Jebediah all the day and night long. Fern had alerted Sheriff Skiffington that he might run, and the sheriff made sure his slave patrollers didn't retire for the night without knowing where Jebediah was. Everyone got used to his being a good worker. Then, near the end of the 3rd week of doing what he was told, he would just saunter off. He didn't make a show of it. He would simply drop whatever they had him doing and walk away and go fishing. Or he'd pick blueberries and gorge himself right at the spot where he picked them. Or he would find a pasture to nap in, moving the cows away if they were in a spot he relished. They would drag him back with a little fuss, but he would be at it again, maybe not the next day or the day after, but pretty soon. With the fourth week, he began going off in the night and returning before morning, seemingly with no trouble from the slave patrollers. Several slave women in the area knew his name and knew it well. He told one he was a preacher man, and had been called by God Almighty. What Fern and Ramsey were to discover was that he had somehow gotten hold of a piece of paper and made himself a pass, and had been showing it to slave patrollers any night they found him on the road. He had been fortunate that he had not run into Odin Peoples. This nigger, the paper said, his own business for his owners, Ramsey and Fern Elson at the Elson estate. He can be trusted to come back home. It was signed Fern Elson, but it looked nothing like her signature because he had never seen it. The Elsons took that pass away from him, not knowing he had another signed Ramsey Elston. On that one, it was not just on business for the Elsons, but urgent business. But the worst of it was that he started calling out whenever he was near the house that he wanted his money. "Have y'all got my money? Have you got what y'all owe me? I want my $500. In the night, before they took his passes away, he would say it. He said it on the way to the blueberries, and he said it on the way to a nap. "I ain't forgot y'all got my money." Ramsey came out one morning and shot his pistol over Jebediah's head, but that didn't stop him. Then, 3 days after Ramsey returned to gambling, Fern came out and told him she wanted him to turn over a new leaf. She had Coley and 2 other men grab hold of Jebediah in front of the cabin he shared with one other unattached man. "This will all end today," Fern said. "I have been patient, but my patience is at an end. If you do not do right, I will have you in chains again." Jebediah said as she walked away, "If you was my woman, you wouldn't be sleeping in that bed alone every night." She stopped, but she didn't turn around. "Do you know how long it would take me to undo your hair and get them things off you? You know how long?" He must have known, with that heart and mind born in slavery, that he'd gone way too far, and he bowed his head. Without a word from Fern, the men released him, and Jebediah took off his shirt and lay on his stomach on the ground. Fern never liked to flog slaves. For every whip mark on one slave's back, she estimated that his value came down to $5. But there were some unforgivable matters in the world. They whipped him 15 times, the last 5 having little effect because he had passed out at 10. He took a week to recover, was silent as he went about his work, and he didn't stray. A week after he went back to work, he stepped on a plank with a rusty nail in the barn. He thought nothing of it at first, just doctored the wound with a little mud and some spider webs. But the wound festered, and in the end, they had to saw off Jebediah's right foot to save his life. He didn't move from the front of his cabin after that, except to go into the privy or to go in to eat and sleep. A little less than 2 weeks after they cut off his foot, Fern came down and told him she would set him free. He said nothing, just went on listening to his phantom foot, talking loud to him. He came up with Coley to the house the next day, up and into the kitchen. He was on the crutches someone had fashioned for him. Fern was at the table, writing. When she was done, she blotted the paper and handed it to him. He read it and handed it back to her. "Ain't but one T in manumit," he told her, "except when you're using the past tense." She had never written the word before. She wrote the paper again, then wrote another. Men were notorious for losing things. With all the human beings she would ever know in her life, he would be the only one she would come close to saying, "I'm sorry" to. She gave him a wagon and an old horse to travel on, and she gave him $50. "You and your no-good husband owe me $450 more, and there ain't no way around it. I give you all the work I done and my foot for free. Thank you." They hit me at the wire with the furthest one.
Thank you for reading this
well, moving piece, which is also very humoristic, so it was an excellent illustration of what I tried to convey about the book. I told the audience a little bit about your life, and I apologize for the people of Holy Cross in Massachusetts for having insulted them. But I'd like to begin this interview by asking you a few questions in your career as a reader. And I'd like to have your reaction to a couple of African American classics which were published during your lifetime, and I wonder whether you've read them and what the effect on you was, and whether they sort of helped you in your career as a writer. And the first one would be, and that's cheating a little bit because it's a novel out from 1952, when you were 2, so you wouldn't have read it when it came out. But that's Invisible Man by Ralph Waldo Ellison, classic Black American novel.
Yeah, I read that one. I read Invisible Man when I was, I think, 16 or 17. And I think I was at a stage in my life where I was discovering novels and short stories. So it, like just about everything else I was reading at that time, had a great impact on me. My mind was sort of widening to the rest of the world, especially to literature, and I was quite struck by it. I had also been struck several years earlier when I read Richard Wright's Black Boy and Native Son.
That was, of course, published before you were born.
Yeah.
But did these novels also, well, instill in you a feeling of, I want to be a writer too, I want to do what Ellison and Wright do?
No, I think the writing part came several years later when I was in college. There are in America you grow up if you grow up in a certain world, there are certain things out there that you don't grow up thinking you can do. If your father, for example, is a prominent person in the community, a lawyer, a doctor, or something, you might well have for dinner regularly a writer, a painter, and those people are large in your life, and so it's natural somewhere along the line for you to begin thinking that perhaps I want to be a writer or I want to be a painter. Well, that was never the case with me. I read books before I got to college, a lot of books by black authors, but it was never, my mind never made the leap to thinking that I would be a writer. I suppose that, like a lot of people the world over who are born in certain circumstances, there is a need, a talent that you have, but unless something opens up for you, someone tells you that that's a possibility for you, then you go on living your whole life never experiencing that. Mm-hmm. And I think that maybe, just maybe, had I not gone to college, and then once in college, had I not taken a creative writing course, then perhaps I would have gone on to live my life thinking that maybe there was something missing, but I might not have known what it was.
The second novel, and that even made an impact in Holland, though that was as a television series and not as a novel, is Roots by Alex Haley. Did that make an impact on you too as a reader when you read it? Did you read it, or did you see the television series?
Yeah, I read the book, and then the series came out, and I think that with the series, I was caught up with a lot of other Americans in this, that a sort of light was now shining on an aspect of American history that it's not discussed a lot. I mean, there are books, and I think there may have been, in the 60s, there may have been a television movie, the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. But Roots was the first time that something got a lot of recognition, and more people knew about it. I mean, people in droves were going to the courthouses, going to the libraries, black and white, in order to research their own history. I would never had any sort of desire to find out my own history, so I was never one of those who
went down to the library.
To Ghana, or
Yeah, but,
let alone to
yeah,
Ghana.
Yeah. But I think one of the things that with Roots is that because before Roots, I had read Haley had helped Malcolm X write the autobiography of Malcolm X. And I think that the sense that I got once I knew what Haley's history was of a simple man who went on to become a writer. And I had already been writing some things, and I suppose it was one more thing that came along and told me that this thing might well be a possibility for me.
So it was more the writer than the book that inspired you.
Yes.
To, can you remember when you read your first Toni Morrison novel, and which novel of Toni Morrison's was that?
I think it may have been Bluest Eye. But I may have been struck by that, but not so much as what happened when I read Sula and then Song of Solomon.
Song of Solomon.
Yes.
And that was the one that sort
yes. Yeah.
That was also a novel which, of course, very much made an impact on the American imagination.
Yeah. It was quite obvious that she had matured. The first two books. All of that was in the book. It was clear that she had reached, a higher level.
I mentioned Invisible Man because I think that was the first novel by a black American author who got the Pulitzer Prize.
National Book Award.
A National Book Award. He didn't get the Pulitzer Prize.
No, I think
Richard
Margaret Walker a few years before that. Maybe Gwendolyn Brooks, I believe. Both, I think, for poetry. I'm not sure that anyone got the Pulitzer Prize for a novel. Many years. Yeah.
Another, well, I don't know whether that was a Pulitzer Prize winner then, but was Alice Walker with The Color Purple.
It did, yes.
It did, yeah. Can you remember when you read that, what impact that made on you? Or?
I have to say that not very much. I've never cared too much for Alice Walker's novels. The stories are wonderful and beautiful. I just find that there's something always missing for me. It's rather, at times, like an essay writer who decides, no, I will not write an essay, I will write a novel. And the same thing with The Color Purple. That was just, there was something, it was several years before the novel came out, there was a book written by a collective of feminists, Our Bodies, Ourselves, which the aim was to give women a greater sense of their bodies, and it told them things of how to check themselves for this, that, and the other. And there was something in there about looking at your own privates, for example. Well, as I said, this was several years before The Color Purple, and I read the novel, and in there is the same sort of thing.
So it was too didactic a novel for you.
Yes.
Well, not exactly didactic for a man.
Yes, and I read this before somewhere, so I was not at all impressed. The stories, however, are always original, always great.
Well, I mentioned all these books, and we will step off from this now, but because they were all in a way controversial in American literature, or they what I said, made an impact on the imagination. Your novel was also controversial, I can imagine, because it portrayed a black slaveholder, and it's probably the first time that has been done in literature. When did you discover the fact that there had been black slaveholders? Is that something that people grow up with in schools, or was it really a discovery?
No, I learned about that when I was in college, and it wasn't a book, and it wasn't a professor's lecture. It was, I think, a simple thing like a footnote someplace, passing comment. And for the most part, in high schools and in colleges, students are taught American history, which is some 200 years, and it goes on for a year. And American slavery, I think, is given perhaps a week or 2 weeks, and almost always, it's a question of black and white.
And the blacks as the victims, and the whites as the oppressors. And,
yes, I know that I never heard about it until I was in college, and then it wasn't a part of a course. So it's a side thing. It's not really something that's well known. And something else that I'm learning since the novel came out is that a great many blacks who bought slaves bought their own relatives, not for economic exploitation, but because one wants, as in the novel, Augustus Townsend first buys his wife, and then he buys his son.
Yeah, but that's to free them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the Royals loved him, and he wanted them near him.
Yeah. When you heard about this, did you immediately think, well, there's a good novel in that?
Oh no, I was in college.
It was before you were
Yeah.
even thought of writing.
Yeah. No, it was. That was 69, 70 or something like that, and it wasn't for some 22 years that I began to think that I remembered that, I recall that fact, and then I
suddenly
decided,
struck, and you thought, well, there's a novel in that.
Well, I think that one is that the creative mind works rather differently than a lot of other minds. I had finished the collection of stories, and I suppose the creative mind also abhors a vacuum. And it sort of looked around for something else to do, and it remembered this fact of black slave owners, and then I began crafting a novel around that idea.
We heard you reading from a passage in which Fern in which there is Fern, the black woman who is the educator of many slaves and former slaves in the county. At one time in the novel, she says to, I don't know to whom she says it, but she says, the hitter can never be the judge. That's when somebody has been hit. The hitter can never be the judge. Only the receiver of the blow can tell you how hard it was. Yeah. The good thing about this sentence is, I think, that it works on us in a sort of metaphorical way. Because my question would be, could a novel like yours, a controversial novel about black slaveholders, have been written and published by a white author?
I'm not sure if I can answer that. The one thing I will say is that in the beginning, almost all of the white characters in the novel had very minor roles. And then over the years, as I began to work it out in my head, and then after 10 years, when I finally got down to the physical act of writing, there were several characters, Sheriff John Skiffington, William Robbins, and some others, who became more and more important for me. And so they went from being minor people to being major characters on the stage. And I have to say that in the beginning, when it first came to me, my intention was to just write, for the most part, about the slaves that Henry Townsend owned. I really wasn't concerned with anyone else, not even Henry Townsend. I was just going to stay in that particular, what I called the village. And then, of course, over time, things changed. And when I knew that the white characters were going to be more important than they were originally, I never once asked myself, well, can I do this? Should I be doing this? Yeah. And I think in America, one of the things is that someone mentioned to me not too long ago that in America, black people know more about white people than white people know about black people. And that's why you get time and time again so many white writers, when they're about to write about black characters, they say, can I do this? You know, can I do justice to this? I don't think black writers do that. They never do that. So as far as whether they can or not, I think one of the problems at times with writers is that because they live so much with stereotypes, and you see that quite a lot in movies, for example. The black people are loud. The black people speak profanity all the time. And I'm sure that sort of filters down to writers. Yeah. The people are often quite one-dimensional.
Yeah. The funny thing is that you answer my question literally. Could this book have been written by a white author? What I also meant, because it's half of the question, what I also meant is, would the reading public in America have accepted, or the black reading public would have accepted the fact that this novel had been written by a white person?
I think it would all depend on how the characters came out. If they were fully realized, if they were three-dimensional, then I don't think anyone would have a legitimate problem.
But you never know, of course,
No,
because
we'll
it
never
was
know.
a hypothetical
No, but
question.
the world, there's only so many stories to tell, and what we do, we're all coming along and telling the same story, only putting different clothes on it. So some guy next year can come up with the same sort of thing and put different clothes on it.
Okay, well, they probably will. The known world is a work of fiction, but the interesting thing about it is that it reads at sometimes like a sort of documentary book. You put in all kinds of documents, you refer to theses, which I presume have never been written, but you made them all up. There's a lot of fantasy in this fiction, because it is fiction, of course,
Yes.
but it's all in the guise of a documentary. Have you ever been afraid when you were writing that people would criticize you because, in making a fake documentary, as it were, you were not taking this serious history seriously?
Yeah, I think that the problem with me is that there are probably rules for doing this kind of stuff, but I never read the rules.
That's always easy.
So I just made stuff up as I went along because no one had told me that I could not make it up. My intention with all of that was I set out to do a whole lot of research, to read some 40 or so books about American slavery, and in addition, I was also going to visit a friend of mine in Virginia, and my plan was that we would ride around in his pickup truck, and I would use his county as a setting for the novel. My heart was never in doing the research, so I never read any of the books, and I never got around to visiting my friend. So at the last moment there, after 10 years, I was faced with having to create my own county. Necessity is the mother of invention, and it certainly was the case with me. And so because I had an imaginary place, I had to make the reader believe it was real with facts and figures.
Which you made up.
Yes. Oh, yes. No, I mean, and it should sound as if it, when I'm talking about the census and how many white people, how many slaves, how many free people, how many Indians and everything, I know that numbers like that sound real. And so the fiction is all about telling the most detailed lie in order to tell the greater truth. So if I just not put all that stuff in there, then maybe people would have believed, but it's better that they believe even more with more stuff that I threw in.
And when the book came out, was there anyone who criticized you for using documents that didn't exist and putting up lies to tell this greater truth?
No, but I don't have. When it came out, I didn't have a computer that was connected to the internet, so I wasn't able to find out things, and I still haven't really been able to find out things. And New York didn't always send me reviews. So perhaps someone has written something like that, but I have never seen it. Well,
that's an easy idea. I mean, you can live with that, obviously.
Yeah.
In the introduction, I compared Known World with 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. That's not only because it has this structure of interweaving stories in several time spans, it's also because there are magical realist touches to the novel. You have, for example, dead people who walk around after they have been killed for a short time, not during the rest of their lives, you can't say, the rest of their deaths, but for a short time. There are cadavers that speak to the living. And there's even a cow who supplies milk endlessly as a sort of, almost wondrous figure. Why did you put in this magic realism into your stories, into this documentary story?
Well, like all of the religion that's in there, I have to be true to the people that I'm writing about. I'm not religious, but I often say that I'm sort of doomed to write about the people who are. I'm not a superstitious person, but I grew up and among people who are. I write about people who are, and if I'm to tell the truth about all of those people, then I have to do justice and write about their beliefs. And
their
that's part of
beliefs
it.
are that cows give
great
supplies of milk, and,
well, in
and
this
people
particular
walk
instance,
around after their deaths.
Well, I have to say that in the novel, I threw just about everything that I ever learned in life in the novel. In the 1970s, a lot of my friends were going off to law school, and they were we'd talk about what they were doing in their courses. That's what the gentleman here who knows the law and he knows this case. But many of them told me about this one particular case where a man had a cow that wasn't producing milk anymore, and he decided to sell it to someone. And I think the case was that the buyer thought that it produced milk. Well, the seller knew it didn't. But lo and behold, the cow started producing milk again. And
Magic realist cow.
yeah, and the man, the seller took him to court because his argument was that I sold him something that
Was
was
worth
one
more.
thing, and now it's something else, and I should have it back.
I
don't
hope
know
he
how-
didn't stand a chance.
I don't. And the funny thing is that I don't know how the case turned out, and I'm rather glad that I am, because I think it might have affected how I was writing. But in that instance, with the cow and everything, I wanted to show how the sheriff had a certain Solomon way about him, and when you're looking for things of how to portray characters, the mind just leaps through the Rolodex in its head. And I remember the thing about the cow, and that seemed to fit, and so I said, yes, I'll do that with John Skiffington.
We haven't talked about the title, which is The Known World. I probably should have been talking about that. We can do that now. The Known World, it refers at one part in the novel to an old map which is in the sheriff's office, and which portrays, I think, America, and which is the known world. But there must be a reason why you took just this title for the novel as a whole. Why is that?
Yeah, the real map was bought by, when I was in Germany not too long ago, and I guess this must be a copy of the same thing that's now being auctioned by Christie's.
Oh yeah, I read about that. Is that the same map?
Apparently, yes.
The first map on which the word America is.
Yes.
is
I thought there
printed.
was only one, the one the Library of Congress bought a few years ago, but I suppose a map maker doesn't have to do just one.
No, they worked in series.
Well, originally I was going to title the novel All Aunt Hager's Children. Aunt Hager's Children being the phrase my mother used for black people. And that fit when I was just going to write about the slaves that Henry Townsend owned, those 33 human beings. And then, as other people, the white characters became larger and larger, All Aunt Hager's Children, the title did not fit anymore. So I had to come up with something else. And I remember that map, and I decided that I would put it on Skiffington's jail wall. I put in a lot of things that the articles didn't say. I added a great deal more, including the legend, the known world. That was my own invention, because I think it sort of fit with what I was doing.
And what were you doing? Were you portraying the known world for the slaves and the ex-slaves? And is there a world outside which you were referring to?
The map, as I describe it, is a rather cockeyed view of the world. The dimensions are all off because obviously the person, at least the person that I describe in the novel, had no idea what the world looked like. One area is larger than it really is. One area is smaller than it really is. So it was a sort of topsy-turvy kind of a map, and that sort of fit the kind of world that I thought I was describing. It's
Topsy-turvy.
Yeah, it's sort of when as this section you read about that it was already a messed up world when whites were owning blacks, but now it was even screwier now that blacks were owning blacks. And at one point, one slave wonders if God is even up there attending to his business anymore.
Yeah, that's the topsy-turvy world. Yeah. There is a motto to your book, as many books have mottos, and in this case, the motto is a little sentence, and it is, "My soul's often wondered how I got over," and I must say I was puzzled by that. I couldn't analyze. Is it from a Negro spiritual?
It
or
is,
it...
and at the moment that I realized I wanted to do that, I couldn't think of what the title was, so I couldn't give credit. The only thing I knew was that line, and I had to go with that.
But how does it connect with the book?
Well, after I sent the manuscript to my agent, and he had sent it on to the woman who became my editor, and this woman, Dawn Davis, she read it, and she came back to me with very minor suggestions, comments about really small things, and I used, because I was, when you are about to enter something with this person who's becoming your editor, you don't know who you're dealing with. It could be the devil, so you sort of prepare yourself. I want you to change everything from page 1 to last page, and so you're ready.
Put it all in chronological order.
Exactly.
In your case.
Yeah. So you sort of you're worried, and there was none of that with Dawn, and so I use it as an opportunity to sort of just try to read the whole thing again with as fresh an eye as I possibly could. There's a couple in there, a slave couple, Celeste and Elias, who find each other despite the way the world is. And while they're not free, they achieve a kind of freedom in the love they have for each other and the love they have for their children. And I realized that when I was reading it over after Dawn had sent it back to me, that was probably one of the ways that people managed to survive. Mm-hmm. And I knew as well that there were people who probably didn't have families. And how did they survive? Because many of them did. And there's a character in there, Stanford, who spent his adult years chasing young women because someone had told him when he was a child that that's the way you escape slavery, is by always having all the young women around you. Well, at one point he gets to a moment in his life where none of them are attracted to him anymore, and he's sort of hopped up on this bad liquor, and he decides on this day to commit suicide. Well, something happens, something supernatural in a certain sense, and what happens is that he ultimately is redeemed. Mm-hmm. Now, what's in the book now has to do with Stanford and thunder and lightning and blueberries and crows and children in cabins flying through the sky. None of that was in it before Dawn came back with those small suggestions. And I realized, because first, originally Stanford just got into a fight and then he was nursed back to health, and that was the end of it. I had never been happy with that, given that he had abused women all his life. Mm-hmm. And so I went back and included all that I described as a way of sort of redeeming him, and also as a way of showing how some people who didn't have families managed to get to the other side. Because after this episode, he achieves freedom later on, and he goes on to found the Richmond Home for Colored Orphans. Yeah. And I realized that with Celeste and Elias, it was a matter of having love and family, and with Stanford, it was a matter of realizing that the world is large, and so you should care about other people other than yourself. And that's how.
Well, you have added a number of other characters now to what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, The Known World is a book with many characters. Was there a center for you as a writer? I mean, were there any characters you felt more for than other characters? Or were all the characters as much in your mind as all the other ones?
They were. All of them were. And even the people, despicable ones. There is a moment in the novel where one horrible man, one of the worst in the book, does something to a very, very good man. Mm-hmm. And in that section, once the deed is done, once the act is committed, I could have stayed with the victim, and milked the scene for everything with all the emotion and everything. But rather than that, because I was concerned that the victimizer be shown in a full light, mm-hmm. I stayed with the victimizer and attempted in the next 2 or 3 pages to show how he got to that moment in the night where he would do this thing to this very, very good man. And particularly when you're dealing with people that the reader might consider to be bad, you have to do a little bit more to show the fullness of the character, far more, of course, than you would do with a good person.
So in the book, in writing the book, you were as much with this cruel slave patroller as with his victim.
Yes, yes. Because at that point, we know the good person. We know who he is. We know what his heart is. We don't necessarily know all about the other person.
There is one thing, we were talking about the motto and about the title, but the interesting thing is that every chapter in the book is headed by sort of poetic, impressionist little phrases. For example, if you have chapter 1, it has a number, I think about 10 words, and it is liaison, full stop, the warmth of family, full stop, and then stormy weather. And that's the heading of a chapter. How did you come up with these sort of impressionistic lines?
That came about because I was rather taken when I was in college. I had there was a 19th century novel course, primarily British literature, and many of the novels that I read did the same thing.
But they don't do it that poetically.
Well,
I mean, they sort of...
They were in the 19th century. I was in the 20th century.
That's the difference. Because then it's in which our hero is going to the barber's and meets his fiancée.
I was inspired by that, but I knew, of course, I was coming along later, and I had to do things rather differently. In the beginning, those chapters were just going to be one. There now 3 descriptions. There was just going to be 1, but as I began working on it, I realized that 1 would not do it. 3 was what was needed.
It gives a very nice effect, but that's something that people have to read, of course. Your first book was a collection of short stories, and in a way you could call The Known World also a sort of collection of interlinking short stories. Is the short story the perfect way for you to convey things in literature?
Perhaps so. I think I like this whole idea, especially in a story. And my stories tend to have a great deal in them. I'm thinking about one that I did that was in the New Yorker not long ago, titled, as it were, All Untitled Children, where about 3 or 4 things are going on. And because I like the idea of a reader, once a story is done in 25 or 30 pages, manuscript pages, to feel as if he or she has seen an entire world and not just a little segment of that world. And I'm also taken with miniatures in life. I collect American stamps, and I collect these Japanese figures, nitskis, which are about 1 or 2 inches tall, but they're like these sort miniature statues.
For your belts?
Yes, exactly, yes, exactly, yeah. Just wonderful, wonderful figures. And, you can hold these tiny things in your hand and see this. It's just marvelous art, marvelous art. So, of course, I'm not making stamps, and I certainly couldn't carve any of those figures. The best that I can do is write these miniature stories.
That's the case in fiction, or in prose.
Yes.
Does that mean your next book is also going to be a collection of short stories? Then?
Yeah, but that's because when I was composing the novel in my head, I was also composing these new stories. And I didn't know if anyone would even buy the novel. That was a hope. And if they did buy the novel, I knew that I would have a less chance of perhaps selling another collection of stories. So with my agent, I told them, try to see if they will buy the novel and the stories. So that's all. It was
a package deal.
It was, yeah.
I would like to ask the audience whether they have any questions for Edward P. Jones to round off the afternoon with. Is there anyone? Yes? Yes, you have to stand. If it's possible, walk to the microphone so that everybody can hear your question.
And do I have to announce who I am? Okay. My name is Frances Gouda, and I live here in Amsterdam, although I'm American, half. I was interested and intrigued by the question you were posed this afternoon about whether a white man could have written this book. it seems to be a particularly Dutch kind of question, because a couple of months ago, I was listening to an identical kind of interview between a Dutch person and a very well-known Dutch woman writer named Hella Haase. And the interviewer asked her, could Oorlog, which is a book she wrote in 1948 about two men, an Indonesian nationalist and a Dutch colonial young man, could Oorlog have been written by a man? So I wonder whether you have ever received this question from an American colleague, writer, journalist, and what your response to that question is.
I really don't. I think I may have, but it's been quite some time, and there have been so many questions. But I think probably it wasn't the same answer as I gave Peter, because I sort of a lot has happened since the book first came out, and a lot since probably the first time that was asked to me. So I think it's the same sort of response, that if a person thinks that he can be fair, then why not do it? It's on the same sort of line. When the white characters became larger than they were originally, I didn't second guess myself. And it's the same way, because I tend to write a lot about women. I never ask myself, well, can I do this? You know, you see the character in your head, you see what she's doing, what she's saying, and you go ahead and do it. So I never think even about that. So I can't really answer the question about anybody else. I can only answer from my point of view.
And my question, of course, to defend myself a little bit,
was
of course also about the reception. And the thing again was that I was thinking of this book by Presser I mentioned, because I don't think that such a critical view of Jews in wartime could have been written by a non-Jewish author. That wouldn't have been accepted by the Dutch. Maybe now, after 50 or 60 years, you can do that in fiction, but I think at that time you couldn't have done that in fiction. You would have to have a Jewish author who did this, because otherwise he would be accused of anti-Semitism.
Well, but there is a kind of essentialist thinking behind that only black writers can write about slavery, or only women can write about women. So when Hella Haase writes about men, the question is asked, could this book have been written by a man? Or how would the book have been different had it been written by a man? And that's the implication of your question. And I was just interested whether
I would say that the
this would have been asked in
the
America.
first question is nonsense, and the second question is a good question. Okay. Lido.
Sorry to mix in this discussion. I'm the publisher of Hella Haase and I'm the publisher of Edward Jones. And the question that Hella Haase was very much attacked and all appeared, not because she was a woman who wrote about two men, but because she was a white colonial writing about the feelings of an Indonesian boy. And Charlie Robbins, who being Indonesian, made a big argument about that. And it takes on until this day. And if you read the last novel, later on, the discussion is like that. So it's not a matter of being male or female. It's about race again. And we had a similar discussion a long time ago. So that was the discussion. So that's I thought.
And it's a very interesting discussion, of course. I mean, it is very, yeah. Yeah. Another question.
Hello, thank you for coming today. I'm Vietnamese, but I grew up in California. And my parents, well, we were boat people, so we came over in 1975. And my parents wanted to make us successful in America, so that would be embracing all the things that make a white American successful. And in my high school, I was the first Vietnamese person, and all my friends were white or Mexican or Japanese, but no Vietnamese. Then in my junior year, which is the third year in high school in America, there was an influx of boat people, and there were about 20, 25 kids who came. And I took a curiosity in them and wanted to get to know them because they had grown most of their time in Vietnam. And they were interested in me, but then they were very angry with me when I didn't come join and only be exclusively Vietnamese. And when they found that I wanted to cross cultures, they rejected me. They threw stones at me, they threw coins at me, called me, whore for Americans and such. And when you were talking about your college experience, and you had a friend in law, and you would talk about your education, I wanted to know if you experienced that as a Black American, if you had to travel between two worlds of being successful in a white world and yet retaining part of your culture as well.
No, I did. When I went to college, it was at a time when most American colleges didn't have very many black students, and then once Martin Luther King was killed, they made this great effort, many of them around the country, to find and recruit more black students. So I didn't have a great consciousness about who I was and where I'd come from until I got to college. So I have to give credit to that for opening my eyes in many ways. But I never ran across those kinds of problems. At that time, unlike I think now, when, for example, in a lot of American schools, black kids who are smart, who are bookish, are ostracized by a great majority who aren't that way, unfortunately. But in high school and then in college, it was at that time, education was an important thing, was the way out of wherever you were. So no, I never ran into those kinds of problems. I've been blessed in many ways in a lot of things. Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
It's been about 2 months since I finished your book, so I hope I have this right. But I like the meandering style of your writing. But sometimes you introduced a character or a story and then you just dropped it. And I'm thinking about Henry Townsend's so-called second mother, who... Rita, yes. Yes. She ended up in a packing case with the walking sticks, and she was sent to New York.
Mm-hmm.
As a way of escape.
Yes.
Yeah.
The packing case was opened by, I believe, an Irish woman.
Yes.
And her
immigrant.
son.
Yes.
And that was it.
That was a cliffhanger if there
Yes.
ever was one. Yeah.
That was at the beginning of the book, and I thought, well, maybe she'll come back again, or maybe she won't. But it intrigues me because other characters that we lost sight of, for example, Alice and Priscilla, fortunately, they showed up later on.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, not everything has to be neatly wrapped up. But I was wondering why you did that. Was there some thought behind that? Or did you just think, otherwise I'll have too many stories and the book will go on
Or did you
forever?
just forget her?
No. Well, as you began speaking, ma'am, I was a little afraid it was a question I couldn't answer, but it's always nice when there's one you really got an answer for. One of the things I was attempting was to write about some of the immigrants, and of course all the immigrants who were not black came there free. So you have this Irish woman and her children. You have a couple, as a matter of fact, from the Netherlands. You have a Frenchman, you have a Scandinavian, you have a Polish poet. And all of these are capsules. I don't go into the full stories about these people. So in the section that she's referring to, Augustus has just purchased his son Henry's freedom, and Rita has been caring for Henry while Augustus, his father, and his mother were working to free him. And on the day that Augustus comes to pick up he's made the final payment for his son, and he comes to pick up his child, and Rita hugs him goodbye, but she can't let go. She's afraid of being left there alone in slavery, and she runs after the wagon. And in the end, they take her in a wagon, and they take her home, and they don't know what to do. They're all afraid. Here are these three black people with this woman who is a slave, someone's property. And Augustus gets the idea. He has a shipment of walking sticks that he's going to send to New York. I figure out a way of how can I tell you, because it's necessary for you to know what happened to those people in Washington once they left Manchester County. But I could not go there, as a third-person omniscient narrator and tell you that. So I came up with this idea that I would have a letter written by someone who leaves Manchester County, goes to Washington, and writes to someone in Manchester County. And that person is reading the letter along with you, the reader. That way I can stay in Manchester. Do you see what I mean? That's why I could not go to New York with Rita.
I thank you for answering, but I have to point out that you went to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, but that was but the curtain on all of it is closing, on the whole novel is closing, and so people who are prominent, who are important throughout the book, I'm summing up what happened to them, and most prominent, of course, was John Skeffington's wife, and also this girl that Skeffington and his wife had. I could not really end the novel. I could not close the final curtain without letting you know what happened to them. Rita was a very, very minor character, and I could not really go to New York and tell you what happened to her. I will say that you're about the fourth or fifth person who has had a great interest in what happened to her.
So she probably merits a sequel.
I'll talk to my creative mind and see what he has to say.
We'll hear about that. By the way, you mentioned the Dutch people that are in the novel, although they're living next to a existing river, I didn't find the city where they lived in anywhere on any map.
That's what people are telling me, and but I had an almanac. It was 1978. It was put out by CBS News. And in the map, they have maps of the states. They have maps of countries around the world. And I swear, I saw that city. I saw that town. I saw it.
I don't even remember the name. Was it Tuck or something?
Tuck. I saw that now. It's.
I lived on the River Wall, but I never. Never noticed this.
I'll go back and I promise I'm gonna get that. My belongings are still in a box because I moved last year and everything I own is still in boxes. So I'm gonna find that and I'm gonna Xerox and send it back here.
That would be great.
And that bothers me because I wanted everything in Manchester County is made up and so I could say whatever I wanted to say, but I made a great effort that everything outside the county was truthful. The person who made the map. I got his last name right, but some people have been telling me that I got the first name wrong, and I'm sure I didn't make up the name. I got it out of one of those articles that I had, so it was either the Washington Post or the New York Times that led me astray.
Yeah, they're filled with mistakes. Yeah. Anybody else? One more there.
Well,
Just between whites and blacks, but Latinos, etc.
no, I think the thing about America is that, it's always taking 2 steps forward, but of course always 1 step back. Only a week ago, I was getting on a plane going someplace, and there was an article about a report that black people have to pay more when they get a mortgage than everyone else, and we're talking about 2005. Next month, I might be getting on another plane and reading another paper, and some cop will have shot somebody, an innocent person, for somebody taking out a wallet, and the justification will be, oh, we thought it was a gun. So,
That's 2 steps back. Is there any step forward?
No, 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah, but you mentioned only 2 steps back. I mean, what are the examples of where it's getting better?
Well,
Are there any?
well,
examples? It's going to be a hell of a strange foxtrot. It is.
yeah. No, it's. I think the very fact that there are people out there, for example, who are doing this study that found that black people had to pay more for mortgages, and that somewhere someone will read that and some legislature and decide that something should be done about that. Before we all knew that was happening, but the newspapers never cared to report that.
So the mentioning is the step forward.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and people do sometimes take note of that. But that kind of thing happens all the time,
I think I saw somebody standing for the last question.
My name is Colleen Magna. I would like to know how does it come that mostly in the stories with slaves, even in the stories of my grandparents, the slave missed one foot, and after that you get a sort of a happy ending or life could become better. I don't know where it comes from. Even in the story, all black people saw on television, Roots. The slave missed one foot, and after that, life become better. And even in your story, I didn't read your book, but I will. I would like to know if you know where it comes from.
Well, it's not the case with me, man, because one thing I always say is I don't do happy. So
Happy is not my business.
no, that's
No, I know that it's not happy,
yeah.
but it seems like that.
No.
Because when my grandparents told the story about slavery, they mentioned that two brothers, they were running in the bush, and one, they have to cut his foot because he get an accident, and then they separate. Or on the field, something happened with one of the slaves. They cut one foot off, and then he can stay home and work in the kitchen or something like that.
Yeah.
And I didn't.
So
read
it's
the book.
it's a recurring motive in all these old folk tales.
It seems like.
Yeah, I think probably it's the resiliency of people, that you have no choice but to go on, and I think that's reflected in the stories that people tell about themselves. There's not much of a story in the fact that a person loses his foot and simply gives up, which is what happens to someone else in the novel. But, people have to have stories that keep people going. And all sorts of horrors and tragedies that are visited upon them, and they take on the burdens, and they try to get on with their lives. Otherwise, people would simply die out.
So the cut foot is a metaphor for the resilience of people.
Yeah. Not in my case. I didn't think of that. Wasn't a thought in my head. I was just doing drama.
Well, this sounds like a good motive to finish off the afternoon with. I'd like to thank you very much, Edward P. Jones, for your reading and for your answers to the questions. Thank you.